He called the technician useless. Then the CEO noticed the bruises and locked the office door. Welcome back to our channel. Get ready for a powerful story that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have incredible stories coming your way every week. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with our amazing global audience. Today's story is about unexpected moments of humanity, hidden struggles, and how sometimes the people we least expect can become our greatest protectors. Are you ready? Let's begin. The 42nd floor of Meridian Technologies housed the executive offices of one of Seattle's most successful tech companies. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay, while sleek modern furniture and cutting-edge technology created an atmosphere of corporate sophistication. It was here that Marcus Sterling ruled his business empire with an iron fist and uncompromising standards that had made him both feared and respected throughout the industry. At 38, Marcus had built Meridian from a small startup into a billion-dollar corporation through sheer determination and an obsessive attention to detail. His corner office reflected his personality, minimalist, efficient, and intimidating. The walls were lined with awards and recognition plaques, while his massive oak desk commanded the center of the room like a general's war table. Marcus demanded perfection from everyone around him, and his explosive temper was legendary among employees who had learned to walk carefully around their volatile CEO. This particular Tuesday morning had already tested Marcus's patience to its limits. A critical server malfunction was threatening to derail the launch of their latest software platform, scheduled to go live in just 48 hours. Millions of dollars in contracts hung in the balance, and Marcus could feel the familiar surge of anger building as he watched the clock tick away precious minutes of potential recovery time. "Where the hell is the technician?" Marcus barked into his phone, his voice echoing through the spacious office. His assistant, Patricia, had called the building's technical support team over an hour ago, and Marcus's tolerance for delays had long since evaporated. The server issue was affecting multiple departments, and every minute of downtime translated into lost productivity and mounting frustration from his already overworked staff. When the knock finally came at his office door, Marcus was pacing behind his desk like a caged predator. "Come in," he commanded, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. He expected to see one of the senior technicians from the building's IT department, preferably someone with enough experience to solve his problem quickly and efficiently. Instead, a young woman entered the office, carrying a toolkit that seemed almost too large for her petite frame. She couldn't have been more than 25, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing the standard navy blue uniform of the building's maintenance staff. Her name tag read Sarah Chen, and despite her professional demeanor, there was something about her movements that suggested a careful deliberation, as if she was constantly aware of her surroundings. Marcus felt his irritation spike immediately. "Are you kidding me?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "They sent me a junior technician for a critical server issue. Where's Rodriguez? Where's Thompson? Where's someone who actually knows what they're doing?" His words hit Sarah like physical blows, but she maintained her composure, setting her toolkit down near the problematic server bank that dominated one wall of his office. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Sarah Chen from the technical support team," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious tension in the room. "Rodriguez and Thompson are both handling emergencies in other buildings today. I've been briefed on your server issue, and I have experience with this particular system configuration." Her explanation was professional and confident, but Marcus was already too angry to listen to reason. "Experience?" Marcus scoffed, moving closer to where Sarah was beginning to examine the server connections. "How much experience could you possibly have? You look like you just graduated from some community college technical program. This is a multi-million-dollar system, not some home computer that needs a simple reboot." His words were designed to intimidate and humiliate, tactics he had used countless times to assert dominance in business negotiations. Sarah's hands never trembled as she began her diagnostic process, but Marcus noticed the way she seemed to make herself smaller, her shoulders drawing inward slightly, as if she was accustomed to weathering verbal attacks. This only fueled his frustration further, interpreting her defensive posture as evidence of incompetence rather than a learned response to aggression. The server bank hummed quietly as Sarah connected her diagnostic equipment, her movements precise and methodical. Despite the hostile environment Marcus was creating, she had dealt with difficult clients before, but there was something particularly intense about Marcus Sterling's anger that reminded her uncomfortably of other situations where she had been trapped in a room with a man whose temper was spiraling out of control. "Look," Marcus said, his voice rising as he watched Sarah work. "I don't have time for on-the-job training. I need someone who can identify the problem immediately and fix it without fumbling around with trial-and-error troubleshooting. This company has deadlines to meet, and I can't afford to have some inexperienced kid playing around with critical infrastructure." Sarah continued her diagnostic work with methodical precision, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she ran system checks and analyzed error logs. Despite Marcus's verbal assault, she was beginning to identify patterns in the server malfunction that suggested a more complex issue than a simple hardware failure. Her training at Seattle Technical Institute had been rigorous, and her 3 years working for the building's maintenance company had exposed her to a wide variety of technical challenges. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah had specifically requested to handle his case after hearing about the server problems from her supervisor. She had researched Meridian Technologies extensively and knew that their system configuration was similar to one she had successfully repaired at another tech company just 2 months earlier. Her quiet confidence wasn't born from inexperience. It came from genuine expertise that she had learned to downplay in order to avoid unwanted attention. "The initial diagnostics are showing intermittent connectivity issues between your primary and backup servers," Sarah explained, her voice remaining steady despite Marcus's continued pacing behind her. "It's not a hardware failure, which is actually good news. The problem appears to be in the network configuration settings that were probably altered during last week's security update." Her assessment was accurate and detailed, but Marcus was too caught up in his frustration to appreciate her analytical skills. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face Sarah directly, his corporate instincts telling him to assert even more dominance over what he perceived as an inadequate situation. "Security update. That update was handled by our internal IT team, not some building maintenance crew. Are you seriously suggesting that my highly paid professionals made an error that you, of all people, can identify and fix?" The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, and Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She had learned to recognize the warning signs when men in positions of power began to escalate their verbal aggression, and Marcus Sterling was displaying all the classic patterns. Her body instinctively tensed, prepared for the possibility that his anger might progress beyond mere words. "Sometimes external perspectives can identify issues that internal teams might miss," Sarah replied diplomatically, continuing to work while speaking. "I'm not criticizing your IT department. This kind of configuration conflict is actually quite common after major security updates. It's just a matter of identifying which specific settings need to be adjusted." Her explanation was both technically sound and politically careful, but Marcus interpreted her diplomatic language as further evidence of her incompetence. The server room's climate control system hummed in the background as Sarah accessed deeper system logs, her screen filling with lines of code and diagnostic information that would have been meaningless to most people, but told her a clear story about what had gone wrong. She could see the exact moment when the security update had inadvertently created a conflict between the primary server's authentication protocols and the backup system's access permissions. Marcus moved closer to Sarah's workstation, his physical presence becoming increasingly imposing as his patience continued to deteriorate. "How long is this going to take?" he demanded, his voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "I've got board members calling me every 15 minutes asking for status updates, and I have to tell them that my entire system is in the hands of someone who looks like she should be working at a coffee shop instead of handling million-dollar infrastructure." Sarah's hands paused momentarily over the keyboard at Marcus's latest insult, but she forced herself to continue working. She had developed thick skin over the years, learning to absorb verbal abuse without letting it interfere with her professional performance. What Marcus didn't realize was that his comments about her appearance and perceived lack of qualifications were echoing similar criticisms she heard regularly from someone much closer to her personal life. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said quietly, accessing the network configuration interface. I should have the issue isolated and resolved within the next 20 minutes. The fix itself will only take a few minutes once I've identified the exact conflict points. Her timeline was realistic and based on her genuine assessment of the problem, but Marcus's anxiety about the impending software launch made even 20 minutes feel like an eternity. Marcus's phone buzzed with another call from his board of directors, and he answered it with barely controlled aggression. "Sterling here. No, the system is still down. Yes, I'm aware of what this means for the launch timeline. I have someone working on it, but..." He glanced at Sarah with obvious skepticism. "I'm not confident in the current situation." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Marcus's voice growing more strained as he tried to reassure powerful investors while harboring serious doubts about Sarah's abilities. While Marcus dealt with his phone call, Sarah made significant progress on the server issue. She had successfully identified the configuration conflict and was beginning to implement the necessary corrections. The work required careful attention to detail, as a single mistake could potentially make the situation worse, but her steady hands and focused concentration allowed her to navigate the complex system architecture with growing confidence. When Marcus ended his call, he turned back to Sarah with renewed intensity. "That was the chairman of our board," he said, his voice tight with stress. "He's threatening to delay the entire product launch if we can't guarantee system stability by tomorrow morning. Do you have any idea what that means? Do you understand the magnitude of what's at stake here?" His questions weren't really seeking information. They were designed to transfer his anxiety and pressure onto Sarah's shoulders. Sarah continued typing, making delicate adjustments to the server settings while absorbing Marcus's mounting pressure. "I understand the situation is critical, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice maintaining its professional calm despite the increasingly hostile environment. "The good news is that I've identified the root cause, and the solution is straightforward. I just need to complete these configuration changes and run a full system test to ensure stability." Marcus's frustration reached a boiling point as he watched Sarah's measured, methodical approach to what he perceived as an urgent crisis requiring immediate action. "Straightforward?" he exploded, his voice echoing through the office. "Nothing about this situation is straightforward. You've been here for over an hour, and you're telling me you still need more time to run tests. This is exactly the kind of incompetent, slow-moving approach that I would expect from someone who clearly doesn't belong in a technical environment." Marcus's explosion of anger reverberated through the office, and Sarah's shoulders instinctively drew inward as she absorbed the verbal assault. Her fingers continued moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, but her body language revealed the toll that Marcus's relentless criticism was taking on her composure. She had learned through painful experience how to maintain functionality while under attack, a skill that no technical manual had ever taught her, but that had become essential for her survival. "I'm implementing the final configuration changes now," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper but remaining professionally steady. The server logs were showing positive responses to her adjustments, and she could see that the connectivity issues were beginning to resolve. "The system should be fully operational within the next 5 minutes, and I'll run a comprehensive diagnostic to ensure long-term stability." Marcus moved closer to Sarah's workstation, his imposing frame casting a shadow over her workspace. "5 more minutes," he snarled, his face flushed with anger and stress. "Do you have any concept of what 5 minutes costs this company? Do you understand that while you're sitting here playing with configuration settings, I have million-dollar contracts hanging in the balance?" His proximity was clearly intended to intimidate, and Sarah found herself instinctively leaning away from his aggressive presence. The server bank emitted a series of soft chimes as Sarah's corrections took effect, and the diagnostic screens began showing green status indicators across all major systems. Her repair work was succeeding, but Marcus was too caught up in his rage to notice the positive changes occurring right in front of him. His business empire had been built on controlling every variable, and having his company's fate in the hands of someone he considered inadequate was driving him to the edge of rational thought. "You know what?" Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt as he watched Sarah continue her methodical work. "This is exactly why I don't trust outside contractors with critical infrastructure. You people don't understand the pressure, the responsibility, the absolute necessity of getting things right the first time. You treat everything like it's just another routine service call, instead of recognizing that entire businesses can rise or fall based on your competence. Sarah's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she ran the final system diagnostics, but she forced herself to maintain focus on the technical requirements of her job. The servers were responding perfectly to her configuration changes, and all connectivity issues had been resolved. She had successfully identified and corrected a complex network conflict that could have taken Marcus's internal IT team hours or even days to diagnose properly. "The repair is complete, Mr. Sterling," Sarah announced quietly, turning in her chair to face him with the diagnostic results displayed on her screen. "All servers are operating normally, connectivity has been restored, and I've implemented additional monitoring protocols to prevent similar issues in the future. Your system is now more stable than it was before the original problem occurred." But Marcus was beyond reason, his anger and frustration having built to a crescendo that prevented him from processing Sarah's successful completion of the repair work. "Complete!" he shouted, his voice reaching a volume that could probably be heard through the office walls. "You call this complete? You've wasted nearly 2 hours of my time, caused immeasurable stress to my organization, and now you have the audacity to claim that you've somehow improved our system." Sarah began gathering her diagnostic equipment, preparing to leave Marcus's office now that her work was finished. She moved carefully and deliberately, aware that Marcus's anger was still escalating and that she needed to extract herself from the hostile environment as quickly as possible. Her years of experience with volatile men had taught her to recognize when situations were becoming genuinely dangerous. As Sarah reached across her workstation to disconnect her diagnostic cables, her uniform sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a portion of her forearm that she normally kept carefully concealed. The movement was brief and inadvertent, but it exposed a collection of bruises in various stages of healing, dark purple marks that were clearly finger-shaped, along with yellowing contusions that suggested a pattern of repeated injury. Marcus's tirade continued unabated, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "Useless!" he spat, the word hitting Sarah like a physical blow. "Absolutely useless. So I should have known better than to trust some inexperienced technician with critical systems. You're exactly the kind of incompetent contractor who gives the entire service industry a bad reputation." The word useless seemed to hang in the air like a toxic cloud, and Sarah visibly flinched as if Marcus had struck her. The reaction was immediate and profound, her entire body tensing as the familiar sound of masculine anger, combined with that particular insult, triggered responses that went far beyond the current professional situation. Her breathing became shallow, and her movements took on the careful, measured quality of someone preparing for potential violence. But something in Sarah's reaction, perhaps the way she instinctively moved to protect herself, or the manner in which she seemed to shrink inward at his words, caught Marcus's attention in a way that penetrated through his rage. As Sarah turned to face him, preparing to respond to his accusation, Marcus's eyes fell on the exposed bruises on her arm, and his brain began processing information that had nothing to do with servers or business deadlines. The bruises were unmistakable in their pattern and coloration. Marcus had played college football and had seen enough sports injuries to recognize the difference between accidental trauma and deliberate infliction of harm. These marks were clearly finger-shaped, positioned exactly where someone would grab an arm to control or restrain another person. The varying stages of healing suggested that this was not an isolated incident, but rather evidence of ongoing physical abuse. Marcus's anger didn't immediately dissipate, but it began to transform into something entirely different as he processed what he was seeing. The executive who had been focused solely on business problems suddenly found himself confronted with evidence of something far more serious and personal. His eyes moved from the bruises on Sarah's arm to her face, and for the first time since she had entered his office, he really looked at her as a human being rather than an obstacle to his professional goals. "Sarah," Marcus said, and his voice had changed completely, the anger replaced by something that sounded almost like concern. But Sarah had already begun moving toward the door, her instincts telling her to escape from the hostile environment before Marcus's anger could escalate further. She had learned never to trust sudden changes in aggressive men's behavior, having experienced too many situations where apparent calm was merely a prelude to more serious violence. Marcus watched Sarah gathering her equipment and preparing to leave, But now his mind was racing with questions that had nothing to do with server configurations or business deadlines. The bruises on her arm told a story that he recognized from news reports and corporate training sessions about domestic violence. But seeing evidence of abuse in person was creating an emotional response that he wasn't prepared to handle. As Sarah moved toward the office door, her toolkit in hand and her diagnostic equipment carefully packed away, Marcus found himself unable to focus on anything except the image of those bruises burned into his memory. The executive who had built his career on decisive action and unwavering control suddenly felt paralyzed by uncertainty, his business instincts warring with an unexpected surge of protective concern that he didn't fully understand. "Wait," Marcus said, his voice lacking its earlier aggression but carrying a new intensity that made Sarah freeze mid-step. She turned back toward him, her expression guarded and wary, clearly expecting another verbal assault about her technical competence or professional qualifications. But when she looked at Marcus's face, she saw something entirely different from the rage that had dominated their interaction for the past 2 hours. Marcus's eyes had changed completely. The cold fury that had characterized his demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like worry. His gaze kept flickering to Sarah's arm, where her sleeve had fallen back down to conceal the evidence of her private struggles, but his mind was clearly processing implications that extended far beyond their professional encounter. "Sarah, I need to—" Marcus began, then stopped, struggling to find words for a conversation he had never expected to have. His boardroom confidence had evaporated, leaving him fumbling for the right approach to address something that was clearly none of his business, but that he found impossible to ignore. "Those bruises on your arm. How did you get them?" Sarah's reaction was immediate and defensive. Her free hand instinctively moved to cover her forearm, even though the bruises were already hidden beneath her sleeve. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her voice taking on a strained quality that suggested she was fighting to maintain composure. "I need to get back to my other service calls. Your system is working perfectly now." But Marcus was no longer thinking like a CEO concerned about server uptime and business deadlines. Something fundamental had shifted in his perspective, and he found himself unable to let Sarah simply walk away with evidence of what appeared to be ongoing physical abuse. Without fully conscious thought, he moved between Sarah and the office door, his hand reaching out to turn the lock with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus said immediately, recognizing that his action of locking the door might seem threatening given their previous hostile interaction. "But I can't let you leave until we talk about what I saw. Those bruises didn't come from technical work or accidental injury. Someone is hurting you, and I need to know if you're safe." Sarah's breathing became more rapid as she realized she was now trapped in the office with a man whose anger had been frightening enough, but whose sudden shift to apparent concern was somehow even more unsettling. Her experience had taught her to be suspicious of men who claimed to want to help, especially when that help came with physical barriers to her freedom of movement. "Mr. Sterling, please unlock the door," Sarah said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that cut through Marcus like a knife. "I appreciate your concern, but my personal life is not your business. I've completed the repair work you requested, and I need to return to my other responsibilities." Her words were carefully chosen, designed to reassert professional boundaries while avoiding any admission that might confirm Marcus's suspicions. Marcus felt his heart rate increasing as he processed Sarah's obvious fear and the way she was backing away from him despite his attempts to appear non-threatening. His corporate training had included sessions on workplace harassment and employee safety, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of confronting someone who was clearly a victim of ongoing abuse. "Look, I know this is awkward," Marcus said, keeping his voice as gentle as possible while remaining between Sarah and the locked door. "I know we don't know each other, and I know I've been treating you terribly for the past 2 hours. But I've seen enough to recognize what those bruises mean, and I can't just pretend I didn't notice. Someone is hurting you regularly, and that's not okay." Sarah's eyes darted around the office, looking for alternative exits or ways to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered no practical escape route, and Marcus's position near the door effectively blocked her only means of leaving the room. She felt the familiar surge of panic that came with being trapped in a confined space with a man whose intentions were unclear. "You don't understand," Sarah whispered, her professional facade finally beginning to crack under the pressure of Marcus's persistent questioning. "It's not what you think. Things are complicated, and I can handle my own situation. Please just let me go." Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting battles that others couldn't see, struggling to maintain normalcy while dealing with circumstances that were anything but normal. Marcus could see the fear in Sarah's eyes, but he could also see something else. A resignation that suggested she had been living with violence for so long that it had become an accepted part of her reality. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, reminding him of news stories he had read about domestic abuse victims who felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. "Sarah, listen to me," Marcus said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in boardroom negotiations, but tempered with a gentleness that surprised even him. "I know you don't trust me right now, and I understand why. I've been an absolute bastard to you today, treating you like you were incompetent when you clearly solved a problem that my own IT team couldn't handle. But this isn't about work anymore." He moved slightly away from the door, giving Sarah more physical space while maintaining his position between her and her exit. "I have resources," Marcus continued, his mind already racing through possibilities. "I have security teams, legal contacts, financial resources. If someone is hurting you, I can help you get away from them safely. You don't have to keep living like this." Sarah's composure finally broke completely, tears beginning to stream down her face as Marcus's words penetrated defenses she had spent years building. "You don't understand," she repeated, her voice choking with emotion. "He's not just someone. He's my husband. We have a lease together, shared bank accounts. His name is on everything. I can't just leave. I don't have anywhere to go. And every time I've tried to get help before, it's only made things worse." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. The woman he had been verbally attacking for the past 2 hours wasn't just a technician who had inconvenienced him. She was someone fighting a daily battle for survival, someone who had been enduring abuse while maintaining the professionalism to solve his technical problems with quiet competence. "My name is Marcus," he said softly, abandoning the formal distance he usually maintained with service workers, "and I'm going to help you figure this out. We're going to find a way to get you somewhere safe, and we're going to make sure you have the resources you need to start over. But first, I need you to trust me enough to tell me exactly what's been happening to you." The silence that followed Sarah's admission stretched between them like a bridge that neither knew how to cross. Marcus stood motionless, processing the weight of what she had just revealed, while Sarah remained pressed against the far wall of his office, tears streaming down her face as years of carefully maintained secrets lay exposed in the space between them. The server bank hummed quietly in the background, a reminder that the technical crisis that had brought them together had been resolved hours ago. But the human crisis they now faced was far more complex and urgent. Marcus slowly moved to his desk and unlocked the office door, the soft click of the mechanism signaling that Sarah was no longer trapped. "You're free to leave whenever you want," he said gently, his voice carrying none of the authority or aggression that had characterized their earlier interaction. "But I hope you'll stay and let me help you. I meant what I said about having resources." Sarah didn't move toward the door, but she didn't move away from the wall either. Her eyes remained fixed on Marcus, searching his face for signs of the anger that had dominated their relationship just minutes earlier. What she saw instead was something she hadn't encountered in years: genuine concern from a man who seemed to have no ulterior motives beyond wanting to help her escape her dangerous situation. "I don't understand why you care," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. 2 hours ago you were calling me useless and incompetent. Why would you want to help someone you think is worthless?" Her question revealed the deep psychological damage that extended far beyond the physical bruises Marcus had observed, suggesting years of emotional abuse that had convinced her she didn't deserve assistance or compassion. Marcus felt a surge of shame as he reflected on his earlier behavior and the way his words had clearly triggered responses that went far beyond their professional interaction. "I was wrong," he said simply, the admission cutting through his corporate pride like a confession. "I was stressed about my business problems, and I took that stress out on you unfairly. But more than that, I was making assumptions about who you are based on your job title and appearance, and those assumptions were completely incorrect." He moved to one of the leather chairs near his conference table, deliberately choosing a seat that put him at Sarah's eye level, rather than standing over her in a position of dominance. "You solved a technical problem that had stumped my internal IT team," Marcus continued, his voice filled with genuine respect. "You did it calmly and professionally, while I was screaming at you and questioning your competence. You're clearly intelligent, skilled, and stronger than I gave you credit for." Sarah slowly moved away from the wall, though she remained standing near the door, ready to flee if necessary. "The technical work isn't the hard part," she said quietly. "The hard part is going home every night and trying to predict what mood he'll be in and what might set him off. Whether tonight will be the night when the hitting turns into something worse." Marcus felt his chest tighten as Sarah's words painted a picture of daily terror that he couldn't fully comprehend. His worst business crisis seemed trivial compared to the ongoing fear that Sarah was describing, and he found himself struggling to understand how someone could maintain such professional competence while living in constant danger. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but filled with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for critical business negotiations. But this conversation was more important than any deal he had ever negotiated, because it involved someone's safety and possibly their life. 3 years, Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "It started small, criticism, controlling behavior, isolating me from friends and family. The physical violence began about a year ago, and it's been getting worse. He tells me that no one would believe me if I reported him, that I'm too weak and stupid to survive on my own, that I should be grateful he puts up with my inadequacies." Marcus stood up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might alarm Sarah. "That's a lie," he said with quiet conviction. "Everything he's told you about yourself is a lie designed to keep you trapped. You're not weak, you're not stupid, and you deserve so much better than what you're getting." He moved to his desk and began pulling business cards from his drawer, his mind racing through the network of contacts he had built over years of corporate success. "I have a friend who runs a domestic violence shelter," Marcus said, holding up one of the cards. "Dr. Jennifer Martinez. She's helped dozens of women escape situations exactly like yours, and she knows all the legal and practical steps involved in getting someone to safety quickly and permanently." He set the card on his conference table, where Sarah could see it without having to approach him directly. "I also have a head of security, Tom Richardson, who used to work for the FBI," Marcus continued, placing another card beside the first. "Zeiss, he specializes in personal protection cases and can make sure you're safe during the transition period. And I have lawyers who handle employment law and can make sure you have legal protection if your husband tries to interfere with your work." Sarah stared at the business cards as if they were artifacts from another world, her mind struggling to process the possibility that escape might actually be achievable. "I can't afford lawyers and security consultants," she said, her voice filled with the practical concerns that had kept her trapped for so long. "My husband controls all our finances, and I barely make enough money to cover basic expenses." Marcus had anticipated this objection, and he was prepared with a response that drew on his business experience with complex problem-solving. "You don't need to afford anything," he said firmly. "I'm going to cover all the costs associated with getting you to safety. Consider it an investment in correcting my earlier misjudgment of your character and capabilities." But Marcus had more to offer than just financial resources. "There's something else," he said, moving to his computer and pulling up Meridian Technologies' employment portal. "My company needs a senior network security specialist. The position pays $85,000 a year plus benefits, and it would involve exactly the kind of technical troubleshooting you demonstrated here today. I'm prepared to offer you that job right now, which would give you the financial independence you need to build a new life." Sarah's eyes widened as she processed Marcus's offer, her mind reeling from the sudden transformation of her circumstances. Just hours earlier, she had been a building maintenance technician living in fear and financial dependence. Now she was being offered a career opportunity that would provide both escape and long-term security. "Why would you do all this for me?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "You don't even know me. We've had one conversation, and most of it involved you yelling at me." Her question was rooted in years of being told she was worthless, making it difficult for her to accept that someone might consider her valuable enough to invest in. Marcus looked directly into Sarah's eyes, his expression serious and sincere. "Because everyone deserves to be safe," he said simply. because talent and intelligence shouldn't be wasted due to circumstances beyond someone's control, and because I have the power to make a real difference in your life, which means I have the responsibility to do so. He stood up and extended his hand towards Sarah, not as a superior offering charity to a subordinate, but as one professional offering partnership to another. Sarah Chen, would you like to start your new job tomorrow morning? We have a secure corporate apartment building where new executives can stay during their transition period, and Dr. Martinez can meet with us this afternoon to begin the process of getting you safely away from your current situation. For the first time since entering Marcus's office, Sarah smiled, a genuine expression of hope that transformed her entire face. She stepped forward and shook Marcus's hand, her grip firm and confident. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Yes, I would like that very much."